It's The World This Week, 7 days, 4 Paris-based correspondents, 1 hour. The World This Week in partnership with The Daily Beast. Joining us, Lila Jacinto, senior editor at France24.com. How are you?
Good. Happy it's Friday.
How are things on the second floor?
Crazy.
Crazy, okay. Freelance reporter and photojournalist Sarai Suarez is with us as well. Thanks for stopping in.
Thanks for inviting me.
Paul Moreira, founder of Première Ligne Television Productions. How are you, sir?
Fine, thank you for having me.
Patrick Smith, editor-in-chief of the Africa Report.
In your shops now, all you need to know about 2019 in Africa.
All right.
What a bargain.
Your end-of-year look ahead.
Absolutely.
To 2019 this time. The World This Week on Facebook and Twitter, hashtag World This Week. Remember last week when we asked for just a few more days' patience with the UK Parliament's vote on a divorce deal set to clear the air?
And if he wants a meaningful date, I'll give him one. 29th of March 2019 when we leave the European Union.
Jeremy Corbyn!
Well,
totally and absolutely
we're going to have to wait
unacceptable.
a little bit longer. The Prime Minister pulling that vote until after the new year. Instead, she got a a leadership challenge from her own party. She survived that. And as the clock ticks towards March the 31st, the patience is running thin with this endless cacophony in the Commons, particularly among the EU 27. Here's Romania's president when asked if he was expecting another summit on Brexit come January.
No, I do not expect it. We expect a positive vote from the British Parliament, not a summit.
Mais que nous pensons aussi que lorsqu'il s'agit de la relation future,
talking about our future relationship, our UK friends need to say what they want instead of asking us what we want.
au lieu de nous faire dire ce que nous voulons.
Yeah, and there was followed by that, Patrick, a testy exchange that took place in the council that was caught on camera.
Right.
May saying, "Are you calling me nebulous?" No, I'm calling the British position nebulous, is what Jean-Claude Juncker said.
Yeah, I mean, it really is splitting at the seams. I think she sounded very much like Margaret Thatcher in that last speech in the Commons we saw, and she's getting sort of geared up for an Iron Lady finale. The problem is that the 29th of March won't cut it. It's got to be now the 21st of January, and that's the limit for the next vote. The problem is she's going to take that document, that proposal agreed with the 27. She's going to take it to the British Parliament, and it's going to be voted down by, we now know, at least 117 MPs. So it's not going to pass. And her strategy, which is essentially wait until we get nearer and nearer the deadline, let's run down the clock and see if we can get somebody to change their minds, enough people to change their minds and get it through Parliament. I just don't think that's going to happen.
The current situation. You don't think it's going to happen? Because in the newsroom, there are those divided. Some say, well, she's rudderless, and others saying, no, she's playing the clock, hoping the other side blinks first.
That's right, and hoping the Europeans will offer her something that she can hold up. But I think the real problem is back in the British Parliament, and Juncker is right about that. And the British Parliament, there is no majority for anything in the British Parliament when it comes to the Brexit path. There's the no-deal Brexit, and there's the Remain crowd, and everyone else in between is too divided to get a consensus. So we're looking at a second referendum.
Too divided to get a consensus? At a time like this, wouldn't it be right for the Prime Minister to convene the leaders of all the parties to Downing Street and have like a proper sit-down, or that's not the thing?
She should have done that 2 years ago when this issue first came up, and her whole attitude has been extremely combative. So I think she's going to get forced into either a no-deal Brexit or a second referendum.
I mean, but she was the one who kept saying no deal is better than a bad deal. And, her bluff is now actually coming up. I have to say that she has won my respect. She's, whether you call her a walking wounded or dead woman walking, she has soldiered on. But I completely agree with you, Pika, for once, that, she's got to speak to the opposition. transition. She survived the no confidence vote by the skin of her teeth. And she survived it because the Conservative Party MPs were told that you either stick with May or you will get Jeremy Corbyn. So there's no such thing as a United Kingdom. And, this same deal is going to go into Parliament. We'll have the same circus again. Hopefully there won't be any distractions. And I think this deal has to pass or there will be no deal. It's just that simple.
This deal has to pass or there will be no deal. British bookmakers have narrowed odds of a no-deal Brexit to 5-2, and in a nod to the fact that the Conservative Party Christmas party happened to be the stage the same night as the leadership challenge against May. Daily Telegraph cartoonist Matt imagining what a no-deal Brexit Christmas party would look like. Come early before everything runs out and people die, Sarai Suarez.
Well, that's the thing. How is the behavior of the people? I mean, the people who vote in that first referendum and they see this no-ending story going on and going nowhere. So if there is a second referendum, my question is how is the people going to react? How are they really going to vote? Is it going to just say stop and we stay where we are? Is there a possibility still to go back somewhere?
Even with the second referendum, it will be the case of we keep having a referendum until we get the result we want, which was the whole problem.
I think there's a justification simply because where we are now is so far away from where we were when we had this referendum vote in the middle of 2016. You have a clear set of choices. It's going to be a complex referendum. I think there'll have to be at least 3 choices. There'll be who wants a no-deal Brexit, who wants May's deal, and then who wants to remain. At least 3 choices. You can have an alternative vote system that could give you a very clear reflection of the public mood. The whole point of what the Brexiters are saying is that this is a great democratic achievement to have 52% of the country voting to leave the European Union, so it must be implemented. Just remember, everyone should remember, that 67% of the people voted to join the European Union. We've had no such threshold passed in this whole Brexit debate. So I think there is a questionable mandate, right throughout the process. Time to ask the people again.
Throughout, we've been asking who's got the mandate. Is it the Prime Minister? Is it the Parliament? Or is it with referendums? Do we need more direct democracy?
Well, that's one of the questions I have in my head, and of course I have no answer to that, is what would happen if there would be a new referendum? My belief is that people would vote Remain for many reasons. I've been talking with British friends, and some of them have voted Brexit out of, anger against the system, and they kind of regret their vote. And I think in a new referendum they would vote Remain. And but that's my bet. A new referendum for me would be killing the Brexit.
All right, France's president going from that EU summit to Strasbourg, a city rocked by a lone gunman's rampage against the city's famed Christmas market on Tuesday evening, with the 48-hour manhunt over and the suspect dead in a shootout with police. A somber mood as the French president arrived in the Alsatian capital. With news of the killing of 4, including a Thai tourist, an Afghan refugee who'd taken his son to see the market, a Christmas market whose reopening was announced just as local police were honing in on a killer with a long criminal record.
We made the decision to reopen the Christmas market. At this stage, the terrorist was still somewhere in Strasbourg, and we didn't know where. And we made the decision for the sake of Strasbourg's honour, for France's honour, to make sure that faced with the attack that we suffered on Tuesday, we could show that our country is able to hold its head high.
Paul Moreira, this was the first major attack of its kind since the month of March in France. And it's one that's really shocked France and also neighboring Germany.
Yes, and I've been following Daesh's operation in France for a while now, sometimes very closely. And the bad news is that it's the first time for a while now that the guy could grab a gun, because lately all the operations have been executed with cars or knives or really low tech weapons. My belief is that this guy is more to be considered as a failed gangster, more than a Daesh operative guy. There's always this thing with the Daesh guys, is that most of them are guys that didn't succeed in being real gangsters and have a total will to finish it off. Their life is miserable, and being killed in action, being shaheed, as they say, is a good option. So.
As redemption or as sort of a nihilistic design?
Both. There's something in them that wishes to end their lives. This guy has had trouble with the judicial system since he's 10 years old. You have to think, 10 years old, he's a child, and since childhood, he's having trouble. So you have to consider this guy as a nut, not as only as a religious fanatic. He just invested the religion, but basically is a lost kid that wanted to die. And Daesh has been very practical for all the people that had this project.
Jacinto?
Absolutely. His profile is such a familiar one. He had a picture of Osama bin Laden in his prison cell in 2006. The point is that this is happening as we say that we're winning the war against Daesh in Iraq and Syria, and it shows just exactly how strategic the IS group's the strategy was to really throw it open to freelancers to take this on. So, we've seen fewer attacks. Mercifully, the security services are doing better. But the fact that this happened in the Strasbourg Christmas market, which has been a target for over a decade, goes to show that there is simply a limit on how much this can be managed by the security forces, and that we just simply have to, we can't consider this dossier closed, as the French say.
There is something that you were saying. This kid at 10 was already having problems. And there is an idea that always come back when we have this kind of debates. And it's the fact that, yes, security is getting better. And yes, they need to work on the defense right now. But there is this element of how about the integration of those kids? It remains a big problem for France, the integration of all these kids from foreigner people who came here, and that doesn't feel French at all. So they're killing French.
Even when in his
French.
case, being born in Strasbourg and yet somehow not feeling
Of course,
French.
they educated by the French school. They're still, connected to the French culture, and they're still getting lost into that dimension of this going back to the source, and that's a big problem that I guess the government doesn't really take care enough, because we go back again to an emergency and we work again on a new attack, but we forget in between to work on that notion. And I haven't heard any ministry or the education ministry or other ministry talking about that idea. And I think that's very important.
Patrick Smith, when you compare the mood, the tone, the mood over the last 3 days here in France now to 3 years ago when there were the Paris attacks, is it the same? Is it different?
Well, no. I think the Bataclan attacks, the volume and the severity of them was of a different order. It was just down the street from where I live, actually, here. And it was almost like Paris's 9/11. I guess it was, in a way. What struck me about what happened this week, it was in the middle of a month of sustained popular protests, which the extreme right have tried to claim, and some of the leftist socialist parties have tried to claim. And so the political scene has changed so much in the last 3 years. You've had the growth of extreme nationalism and populism right across Europe and in the States. It's almost like the jihadis are looking for a place in the political market scene. So, on one hand, they face sort of the hard nationalist calls for, trumping up, that's a Freudian slip, ramping up security, and another, they face their own constituency. What are you doing? The disenfranchised youth second-generation immigrants who feel they're facing religious and racial discrimination. It's across Europe. So I think the marketplace, the political marketplace has changed. The fact that we've had so few attacks, I guess it is a credit to the security people.
Because in the build-up to this attack, there was a climate of violence the last few days in France before. Maybe it's coincidental, and it probably is, because as you were describing, he was about to be pinched over... what is it? An armed robbery, or
something. Homicide attempt.
Yeah.
So it's like gray area.
But
is he a terrorist?
But it happens in the context of the violence we've seen in Paris the last few weeks. High school student protests, which sometimes have been violence on both sides, police and the students.
Yeah, I don't think. I mean, I don't believe that you could relate both.
No.
Because the most violent terrorist acts happened in Paris when everything was ever so quiet. During Bataclan or during Charlie Hebdo, no one could imagine that something so violent was about to happen. There was something in the yellow vests, that happened, was like conspiracy theory wave saying, what a coincidence. Now something so violent is happening right when
and those conspiracy theories spread like wildfire.
It's crazy. Yeah. But because the yellow vest is social network movement, so anybody can say whatever goes through their head, and so we know about that. But again, I think we are not sure, and I'm not sure that the Sheriff Chaquet planned to do an operation 2 days ago. He was raided. His house was raided in another story. And I think he kind of lost it and went to the Christmas market and shot at random to people who was at the market. But again, it's very typical of this new type of terrorists who are totally lost. And Daesh is now just, they claimed it, but from my belief, it's opportunistic. They like last time, they claimed it, but they didn't really prepare anything.
Yeah, I agree. I guess there is a lot of these spontaneous guys who just one day wake up and say, "Hey, I'm going to do this. I'm going to put a mark on the territory." And,
but that's very much their strategy.
And that's very dangerous.
And that's the genius of their strategy. But I totally agree with Sarah, that we need a fundamental rethink of this. There was a lot of talk of de-radicalization after 2015, and that went nowhere. And in order to get to the heart of de-radicalization, France has to confront some really major issues. The whole box of their assimilation model, and it doesn't seem like the political elites want to get into that at all. There's definitely a sense that we're just going to handle this as a security, and just the nation as a whole, it just seems to be so many disparate groups, a rising sense of anger, and I really think we need to look at this somewhat holistically.
We're going to talk about that rising sense of anger when we come back. We're on the eve of what some of those yellow vest protesters have labeled Act 5, when they are saying they're still going to march on the capital. This despite concessions by Emmanuel Macron. Stay with us. You're watching The World This Week. Welcome back, or welcome if you're just joining us. It's The World This Week. The World This Week in partnership with The Daily Beast. Joining us, France24.com's Lila Jacinto. At the conclusion, well, it's not over yet, of a busy week, Sarai Suarez, freelance reporter and photojournalist. Paul Moreira, founder of Première Ligne Television. First Lines, is that how you translate it?
First Lines, yes.
First Lines Television. And Patrick Smith, editor-in-chief of the Africa Report.
Greetings.
Who's come with his latest baby in hand.
That's right. Available at all good bookstores.
All right. Africa in 2019, your year-end look ahead. We were talking just before the break about the mood here in France after the Strasbourg attack. Through it all, supporters of the leaderless Yellow Vest protest movement have been split, it must be said, over whether or not to return to the capital on Saturday.
Okay, there was an attack. People were killed. But we're still struggling at the end of every month. So why should we stop?
I don't think it's a good idea to head to Paris. I think it's a better idea to gather across France. We have wives and children. It's no use going there just to get roughed up or end up in custody.
Paul Moreira, we're asking the same question we were asking last Friday. What's going to happen Saturday?
Well, this time, I think I've been in the protests for the last 2 Saturdays. I wanted to see and to talk with people, and I believe this time there's going to be less people. First, because the level of suppression was very high. Last Saturday, 1,000 people were arrested. A lot of people got shot with those flashball things that can, break your teeth or you gouge your eye. And there is the Macron speech that really gave some material response to the demands of the yellow vests. Even though there's a hardcore of the yellow vests, guys that working class people that don't have any factories to work in anymore, that work 2 hours there, 2 hours here, and that their lives are really in shambles and they are so angry.
So the stereotype that we've seen of the disenfranchised white middle class person who has had to move out to the exurbs or the countryside and needs their car to get to work. Is that true?
It exists, but the people have been, like the hardcore guys that are in the first lines of the riots, they are working class people from Picardy, from Moselle, which is at the east, really the places where the disindustrialization, as we say in French, the factories have gone, are outsourced, work is outsourced to Asia and stuff like that. And really they are in a dire straits. Their situation is really, really bad. They're quite angry. And this thing has been building up for years. They don't believe in trade unions anymore, and it's not a Macron problem. It's really since the 70s that slowly the economical activity in the former working class areas has been vanishing, and this anger is going to last for a while.
Those concessions announced Monday by Emmanuel Macron, more than some thought. In the sense that this rise of a bonus for people who earn the minimum wage, there was the scrapping of new taxes for lower earning pensioners. There were some concessions, and they've in fact put France on a collision course with Brussels because how are they going to pay for it all is the question.
Yes, but the thing is, coming just a few seconds back to that, the fact of using the car or not, the movement has evolved. It's not at all what it was in the beginning. We have fed it with a lot of problems that the French people have been putting on the top every year, and really now is a much bigger thing than just one problem. So the muscles that the movement has now are very different. And regarding to the words that Macron gave us for 13 minutes on Monday, Macron is a guy with a project. He was not really answering the specific request of the people in the street on those manifestations. He was just following his program. Everything he offered to the people he put on the table was in his program. Those elements were already in the program. He was going to do them during his period of the as president, and now he just rushed it up because they in a certain way match a little bit with the request of the people. So that's the anger.
So
that's
you find him inflexible?
I think that's why people are still mad, because they say, you are telling us that you have solutions
so what should he
today,
have done?
and you're not giving us everything. You're not answering to our request.
What should he have done then?
No, I don't know, because I'm not part of the government. He must listen to the people already, I think, was a first thing, because that's the problem with Macron. He speaks, he goes there in his position, he goes and he goes and he goes to the front, he moved forward, and he's not really listening to what surrounds him.
Yeah, it was Monday when the president spoke on national television, and we heard from him an apology of sorts.
Maybe I gave the impression that I didn't care, that I had other priorities. I know as well that I may have hurt some of you with my words. I want to be very clear. If I fought to shake up our political system, the habits and hypocrisy, it's because I believe more than anything in our country and I love it.
But he's put his finger on it. The habits and hypocrisy. That's one of the issues that is at stake here. That seems to be the undeniable cry that you are president for the rich. You came in, we refer to you as a banker president, and you abolished the wealth tax. And that was the first demand of, as far as I understand it, of the Gilets jaunes. And they got it. So they proved the power of the street. So I think it does weaken him hugely. I mean, not just institutionally, because he isn't a weak president institutionally. He doesn't have a party in the provinces. How many mayors has he got? How many local authorities does his party control? He appears to be more and more isolated, particularly in this sort of what they call the empty diagonal from the north east to the southwest, where you've got the people who have suffered most from globalization and deindustrialization. They're rabidly hostile.
Were you expecting him to go back on the wealth tax and to put it back in place, the wealth tax on financial transactions?
Yeah, I was expecting him to go back to impôt sur la fortune, the wealth tax. It's something very mind-blowing is that when you spend time with those guys and those who are not fighting, they're talking with each other and they talk about taxes, but not only about the wealth taxes. They say, Amazon don't pay taxes, Starbucks don't pay taxes, and we pay taxes because you have many working class guys, but you have also very little entrepreneurs, guys who have just one or two employees, and they pay a lot of taxes in France, and they know all those schemes where people go to Luxembourg and they don't pay taxes, and obviously it's something that we have to realize is that they know a lot about fiscality, these people. It's surprising.
About the tax system.
Yeah, about the tax system. And they're very, aware of all the intricacies of how big corporations evade tax. So for me, it's really, now it's becoming a movement about redistribution. How the system is not capable of redistributing the wealth.
I think it's worth saying how popular he is overseas, well, among a certain constituency, but, the internationalists, people who want to see a stronger European Union, people who want to see a sort of internationalist riposte to Trump. He's some kind of hero figure. And, the weakness of Macron now after these, weeks of protests is quite a blow for that hope of, a European figure that can credibly counter populism.
Well, a couple of things. French presidents have not been very popular with their people for a while. It often comes down to style. Macron was too bling. Hollande had no style. Sarkozy was bling. Hollande had no style. And, Macron is too Jupiter-esque. But the fact is, he was elected with this program, with this platform. And, his scrapping of the wealth tax, we knew
he said it on the campaign trail.
He said that what was happening, and that the rich are fleeing France. What we're seeing, and I think what the problem is the sort of French exceptionalism, and the French are very derisive when with American exceptionalism. But in 2018, these are the same forces and patterns that we are seeing with the Trump supporters, an angry post-industrialized population that are just not coming to terms with the fact that the post-50s post-war boom years are over. So yes, their lives are getting more difficult. And somehow, this gets fed in an absolutely nebulous movement about democracy, about representation. The last Gilets jaunes person that I spoke to, I asked her, was Macron's concessions enough? And she was like, no, they're crumbs. Well, what do you want? We want popular referendums. Well, look what happened in Britain. Do you really want popular referendums? People who just don't seem to know what they want. So there's so much of emotion and anger, all this coming out on Facebook. And so Macron has absolutely failed to explain this. And now he's talking about a national debate, a débat national, which the French seem to like. It's a lot of wasting time. But, there'll be journalists sitting their heads, and going like, what is the headline here? There was so much blah, blah. But, there seems to be a need to have a débat national because this was not explained to the French people.
Problems are of a different order in the world's most populous French-speaking country. It's trying to stage its first ever peaceful transition via the ballot box. The odds are stacked against the Democratic Republic of Congo. On top of the deadly violence on the campaign trail, an Ebola outbreak in North Kivu, there's that fire that broke out Wednesday overnight at the National Electoral Commission in Kinshasa, destroying 80% of the capital's electronic voting machines.
Around 1 or 2 o'clock, we were outside the house. We saw and heard a large boom and then straight away saw a lot of smoke. It's a dirty trick because they have guards. Why didn't they call the fire brigade that night? It's all a scheme to find ways of pushing back the date of the election.
All a scheme to push back the elections. You agree with that, man?
There's a lot of evidence to suggest that. Number one is that the President Kabila, Joseph Kabila's chosen successor,
who's the interior
minister, is in real trouble. If you look at the Ipsos Synovate poll, he's polling about 10% compared to one of the opposition candidates, Martin Fayulu, who's polling about 65 to 70%. Everybody seems to be against Shadari, Kabila's Dauphin. So I think he's in a real problem. The slight doubt about who did it is that, of course, everyone in the opposition hates the machine à voter because they think that it's another sort of device to defraud the elections and to fix the result. So there are people on the opposition side who have an interest in destroying those voting machines. So it's not like 100% on the government side.
Authorities say the vote will take place in Kinshasa.
It's going to be very, very difficult if they've lost 80% of the machines. They've got to bring the new ones back in less than a week's time. They've got to get them geared up and registered electronically to work across the country. I mean, the logistics are so formidable in a country the size of Western Europe with an electorate of like 40 million. It doesn't look possible to do it.
Whose idea was this? Apparently, these electronic voting machines also have a low battery life. We're talking.
That's right.
And we're in a country that doesn't have much electricity.
Yep, and they don't have enough spare machines to replace them when the battery runs out. It looks like a disaster waiting to happen, but actually a disaster absolutely foretold and known about by the authorities.
And orchestrated?
Well, you know, you've got to think that so much planning has gone into having a bad election, so there's a reason to postpone it. That must be how it happened.
It's already been postponed for 2 years.
Well, I mean, this election had to happen, but these electronic voting machines, in how many countries we find the same problem, and especially one where the credibility of the election is at stake. And apparently they're going to have manual vote counts as well, which may not tally with the electronic vote counts. I mean, you've just got to keep elections in such countries which are difficult, you know, keep it simple, and because the credibility is at stake. But no, this election had to happen. You know, it's been postponed way too often since 2016.
What is sure is that someone is getting a lot of money from those machines that now are destroyed, and they're going to buy them again. So follow the money, and I guess that there will be some good reports on that in the news.
All right, journalists who've been killed or jailed for doing their job honored as Time Magazine's People of the Year. Among them, Washington Post columnist Jamal Khashoggi, who back in October walked into the Saudi consulate in Istanbul never to emerge. There was a definite jolt since to those who weren't paying close enough attention to the policies of Saudi Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman. Some saying it's pressure on MBS and his allies that have brought the two sides to the bargaining table in Yemen's brutal civil war this week. Negotiators in Sweden concluding a deal to halt fighting in the gateway port of Hodeidah. And lawmakers in Washington from both parties in the U.S. Senate voting to end support for a war started under Obama and continued under Trump.
Today, what the United States Senate said in a very loud way, that we will not continue to have our military posture dictated by a despotic, murderous regime in Saudi Arabia, a regime which does not respect democracy, does not respect human rights.
Paul Moreira.
Well, there are still 25 journalists in jail. Reporters Sans Frontières has been trying to keep up with the campaign to have them freed. So I think that would be a gesture from MBS to show that that they can get out of jail in one piece, each of them. That would be a start of something good. I think it's terrible, really, that Western countries are allied with such a country, that Israel is allied with such a country for tactical and different reasons. I think it's a country that has an agenda which is inflaming all of the Middle East, and it's very dangerous for all of us.
And the progress we've seen in Sweden this week in Yemen, with those Yemen talks for 3 years, it was nobody was paying attention.
Exactly. I mean, there's not only the Khashoggi murder, there's also the first pictures, very stunning pictures coming out of Yemen, of this, the problem of the famine. And I think people are slightly opening their eyes that something huge, very, very horrible is happening now in Yemen, and that if we don't get involved, we'll carry that as a responsibility as nations in the later years.
Is the genie out of the bottle when it comes to the U.S.'s relationship with Saudi Arabia? Because that's what they said back in 2001 after the 9/11 attacks.
Yes, the average American is not very fond of Saudi Arabia. In terms of will the policy change, that is more difficult. But absolutely, the genie's out of the bottle. And even, these images of the Yemen war, the famine was going on, but it was Khashoggi's death that brought all the humanitarian situation into the headlines. And I think it's a very apt selection for Time Magazine's Person of the Year, because in his death, he has really absolutely shaken up the equation in the region.
Patrick Smith?
Well, yeah, I mean, hats off to Time for doing this. They'll also give the award, I understand, to Maria Ressa from Philippines, who's facing Duterte's regime. And I think it's the second time this has happened, actually. It was in London a couple of weeks ago. Chatham House gave their annual award to the Committee to Protect Journalists. And this is just the worst time for journalists. 50 journalists have been shot dead by political regimes around the world. And absolutely, I mean, the Saudi regime is pretty bad. Turkey's pretty bad. China's pretty bad. Across Africa, you're seeing, and Congo, we've just been talking about it, is a difficult place to be a Congolese journalist. So I think it's a fantastic decision to salute that. And it's pretty amazing that it took the very torturous death of Jamal Khashoggi in the consulate in Istanbul for people to come to their senses about this Yemen war. I mean, after all, the British and the American military were arming... And the French were arming the Saudi forces, and the casualties and the... that disgusting word, collateral damage they were doing in the form of starving tens of thousands of Yemenis. It's amazing. It took one man's death to change that. But I mean, in a way, it's a tribute to what the guy was about, and it's a tribute to the journalists' collective resilience, so that it actually is changing history in that way.
And the Sweden talks went better than was expected. I mean, they really underplayed the expectations, and now we've at least got the two sides having a symbolic and shaking of hands and ceasefire in Hodeida.
And more talks to come at the end of January, which we'll be covering. Many thanks, Lila Jacinto, Paul Moreira, Patrick Smith, Sara Suarez. Stay with us. Media Watch is next. And we say hello to Charlie James.
Hello there.
We begin with a story at the border between the United States and Mexico.
That's right. Very sad story that's getting a lot of attention, especially in the United States. A 7-year-old migrant girl has died after being picked up by U.S. Border Control while she was in custody. Now, the Washington Post first reported this story on Thursday, and the reaction has been enormous. She was a native of Guatemala and was picked up last week while crossing from Mexico into the United States. It was actually in the New Mexico desert, where she was picked up with her father and a group of about 160 other migrants. Her cause of death was septic shock, fever, and dehydration, according to the hospital. And that was the result of not having eaten or consumed water for several days while she made this journey. However, people are outraged because she had been in Border Control custody for over 8 hours. And then she actually started having seizures and was flown to a hospital where she later died. But people are asking, well, how come she wasn't given medical attention before those 8 hours. So it's attracted the attention of some huge names here. Hillary Clinton, the former Secretary of State and Democratic presidential nominee, saying there are no words to capture the horror of a 7-year-old girl dying of dehydration in U.S. custody. What is happening at our borders is a humanitarian crisis. And several politicians also calling for an investigation in the wake of this. Richard Blumenthal, senator from Connecticut, saying the senseless, tragic death shocks the conscience. Immediate investigation must shine a spotlight on people and practices responsible. And her death has also intensified scrutiny on the conditions that people are held in these detention centers by human rights groups. So Amnesty International tweeting that this shouldn't have happened. Children seeking asylum do not belong in jails. And Human Rights Watch researcher Clara Long writing, "It is a tragedy, but not a surprise that a 7-year-old has died in border patrol custody. Border jails are built to punish, not to help, and that includes children and asylum seekers."
Earlier, Paul Moreira, we were talking about the yellow vests, was marveling at the fact when he spoke to some of those protesters here in France, how well they know the tax code. They're saying they're getting clobbered by taxes, and they bemoan the fact that the big multinationals don't pay their fair share.
Well, I think that in this case, we're going to talk about, so now move to the Gilets jaunes story.
Right.
Okay, great. So a report out today from Bloomberg that is saying that, in fact, there is a retail winner having to do with these protests. It's really hurt, especially small businesses. It has hurt supermarkets, but Amazon has actually been taking in a lot more money because of these protests. And the reason is that people don't want to leave the house. They feel like it's dangerous, and so they turn to online shopping. And here in France, Amazon is by far the leader in that category. In fact, France's labor minister was on French radio on Wednesday, and she pleaded with consumers saying, go back to small stores. We are enriching American platforms like Amazon and killing the small business. And so this is a real concern here in France, not just for business owners, but for the government as well.
All right, just some of the stories that Charlie James is following. Many thanks for being with us. I want to thank our panel once again. Thank you for joining us here in The World This Week.